Hey there, Last Swing Leadership fans. Welcome back to Last Swing Leadership Podcast. We're here to explore the heart and hustle of leading the lasso way. I'm Jason Rogers, and always I'm joined with my friend and guest host, Garth. Garth, welcome back to the show, buddy.
Yeah, great to be here, Jason. Thank you so much. And we are in season 3. So we're diving into some books that shape how we lead. We're calling it Beard's Book Club in honor of our favorite Stoic sideline philosopher. And each episode features a conversation with an author behind some incredible ideas.
And I say it every time, Garth, I'm excited about this episode, but today I'm truly excited about this special episode. We've got someone here who I've known since my university days back in Saskatoon at the University of Saskatchewan. George Couros and I did our Bachelor of Education together around about the same time. He's a force in education, a speaker who inspires, and an author whose work continues to shape the thinking in schools and around the globe. I feel really honored to know him personally and call him a friend and being able to follow his journey over this time. George, welcome to our podcast.
Were you really following my journey?
George, there's only so much I can follow. Your journey is so
I live
rich.
in a different country, and Jason didn't know that, so
Yeah.
I just want to point that out to everybody. How much he's been following my journey. He hasn't talked to me in like 10 years. I feel like there was a missed opportunity when you passed over to Garth, and Garth just said, party on, Wayne. Like, I felt that was like, it was like a little,
we played
Wayne's World moment there.
We played with that idea a little bit.
The way you said it, I turned over to my co-host Garth, right? So, hey, thanks for having me on, Garth. It's really good to meet you. Jason, it's good to see you. Thanks for keeping up with my family and stuff. It's really nice to hear from you. Just so you know, I have kids now.
George, welcome to the show. Listen, Jason is not as familiar with your work, and maybe some of our listeners actually are. So can you just introduce yourself to our guests? Let us know why you think we brought you onto the show.
Well, I don't know, maybe hard up for guests. I don't know if that's what it is, but Jason and I have known each other for a long time. We went to university together, and it's interesting because a lot of times when you meet people in education, they have this story of like when they were 5 years old, and then they knew they wanted to be a teacher and they want to go in education. That is like totally not my story. I did not know what I wanted to do. Went to university because my parents forced me to go. And then basically 22 years old, we did an after degree program. And I went into education because I saw Billy Madison. I'm like, that looks fun, so I'm going to do that. And that, I wish I was kidding. And and then just kind of, really kind of evolved in, my career. I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. Is the only grade I've never taught. Did grade 1 to 12, vice principal, central office. And I've written several books. And I'm blessed to be able to speak and work with schools all over the world, which is like an interesting perspective, because I think a lot of times people feel if you're out of the classroom, you don't really understand. But I would never say that. I don't tell anyone how to teach. That's not my place. And honestly, I don't like being told what to do, so I don't tell anyone what to do. But you do get a different perspective when you see all these different schools in these different places and kind of see like, hey, this is working for them. This is working for them. What's the things that are related? What are things that are different? How are you utilizing that? It's, you get different perspectives in that space too. So I do my best to kind of learn from those things, try to synthesize those ideas, and then, share them with others, and just really blessed to be able to do that all over the world.
So, George, you wrote a book called Innovator's Mindset. I have to say this, is that I don't go anywhere and mention that book without having a bunch of people saying, I've read it, I know about it, so on and so forth. And that doesn't happen all the time. I mean, there's a lot of authors out there who don't get that level of exposure. And I hope that this podcast does a little bit more exposure for the book, because I think it's a really important piece of work. It was done, how long ago did you write that, George?
10-year anniversary this year.
Yeah, no doubt. And so why don't we give people the Coles Notes from the book? If people haven't read it, what would they learn? And what do you hope that teachers and leaders would take away from reading that book? And maybe is it still relevant after 10 years?
Well, that's actually one of the things that I think is really important to understand is when I was writing that book, I was really heavily influenced by, I know this sounds weird, the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yep.
And I remember first reading that book and thinking, this is incredible. Like, this is so relevant to like what we're doing in education, what we're doing in leadership. And then I was like, when was this written? And then I looked and it was in the 1930s. And I was like, that is amazing to write something that sticks that, for, over that period of time. So when I wrote Innovator's Mindset, it was like, how do you write something about with a focus on innovation that could be relevant, 100 years from now? And so I really talk about innovation of just doing new and better things, right? And so it can't just be new. And I think a lot of schools, to be honest with you, they're always focused on the new stuff, but it doesn't necessarily improve anything, right? It looks good, but it doesn't really improve things. And, better is a subjective term. I think that's part of it too, is that what is innovative to one school community could be just common practice in another, and vice versa. So it's really, how do you deal with change? How do you deal with connections? So a lot of the messaging and the ideas that were shared in there totally apply to, what we're seeing with artificial intelligence schools. How do you actually embrace change, get people to not only deal with it, but leverage it and create new opportunities? And I think that's why it's lasted so long. And a lot of the stuff that I talk about, I do a lot of work on AI right now. And it's basically a lot of the stuff I'm just kind of putting in the context of AI. And it's interesting that you mentioned Stoicism at the beginning of this too. And Jason, before we got on, we were talking about, am I writing anything new? And there is a book that I'm working on right now, and it's tying in, I know this sounds weird, Stoicism to AI and emerging technologies. And the reason why I think that is such an important thing is, if you think about Stoicism, there's like this camp, right? And those people that love Stoicism probably are the ones that are really, we need to go back to the basics. We need to really focus on the things that made us successful in school years ago. And then you have basically the innovation folks that are always about the emerging stuff and connecting. And I think it's almost like these camps are fighting against each other. And so what I've seen is like, hey, listen, if there's these philosophers from all of human history that have been, we revered, seen as really brilliant minds, do you think that just right now their stuff doesn't make sense? Like, it's probably going to outlast us too. So there's obviously some wisdom there that we can leverage, but they were talking about how to deal with change, how to connect those things. So the reason the book, I talk about like, what are the things that, will be forever? And how do we actually use them to leverage change? And so that's what I find really fascinating. So I'm talking about these 10 principles in my writing right now, of things that, like, how we focus on humanity, how we focus on developing curiosity, which is forever a focus in the world. But how does that shape us in how we look at artificial intelligence? How does that shape us in how we look at any emerging technologies? So that's the trick, is how do you actually write a book today that has to do with artificial intelligence that will be relevant even a year from now, let alone 50 years. And that's what I'm really trying to emphasize right now. And I think the reason why it's so important to me is, how do we actually bring those camps together and see the strengths of each other to help us all move forward? That's why it's something, and that's really what I try to emphasize in the Innovator's Mindset. It's not just saying, hey, we don't need reading and writing anymore. It's like, no, actually you do need reading and writing, but how do we go beyond it? That's the emphasis for me.
Well, listen, George, as much as you give me a tough time now keeping up with your life, clearly haven't listened to this podcast, because Garth, every second word he says is stoic. And I'm sure he's got a dozen questions for you about stoicism. Yeah. So Garth, why don't you just fill your boots and get in there with George and lead in with another question?
Well, thanks, Jason. I'm really curious. Yeah, I'm really curious about the innovation, the connection between innovation and stoicism. You're talking about two camps.
Right.
Can you tell us like a little bit more about how leaders can maybe, as you say, like be comfortable with change in order to leverage it? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but COVID, this phrase came to life again, and the phraseology was don't let a good crisis go to waste. And here, I think what I'm hearing you say is like, the world is changing around us. Don't let that go to waste. Like, how do you leverage it and then actually move that to like create new opportunities for innovation or add new value? So help us out, help us understand, like what can leaders do? What's some dispositions that we can encourage our leaders to have to embrace change?
Yeah, and it's funny because so I think really what kind of tied me into this, I read one of Ryan Holiday's books. I can't remember which one it was. And one of the things that I'm known for saying is that change and opportunity do something amazing. That is like a known quote for me. It's in Innovator's Mindset. And so Holiday talks about this, and I just pulled it up from my own blog, which is kind of interesting because I just Googled my own work as you're like posing this question for me.
Yeah.
And he says, yeah, I think it's that book. He said, there's a great exchange between Epictetus and a student that encapsulates a truth path to lasting perennial success in any field. Tell me what to do, the student says. Epictetus corrects him. It would be better say, make my mind adaptable to any circumstances, which is like basically forever we have focused on how do you leverage change, right? So that I think to me is, and Garth, you and I were talking a little bit about kind of like our fitness journeys. I'm very into like triathlon. People don't know this. And I know we had talked about this before in the notes. I lost like 120 pounds during COVID. And I was like, basically, hey, this is, I got to figure something out here because my health has got into really terrible circumstances. And I went through and changed because I said, hey, this is like, I'm not traveling all of a sudden. I got to kind of rethink how I'm living my life right now. And a lot of the things that I've learned from that too, have really, really helped me. And it's based on, hey, there's certain things in learning that just are forever and make sense. So I think when, let's talk about the concept of AI. You have a lot of schools asking the question, how do we use this, with kids? And to me, that's a terrible starting point, right? So all you're going to get is the camps. You're going to say, well, listen, this is horrible. We shouldn't be doing this. Kids are going to be dumber than ever. And it's like, no, this is the future. We got to pay attention to it. So what I actually encourage people to do is say hey, what are some of the negatives of this? And what are some of the positives? In that order, by the way. I want you to get it all out, how it's going to be like Terminator 2. This is going to be the worst thing ever. Talk about all those things and then say, okay, what are some of the positives here? And then once you move on from that question, it's how would I use this in my own personal life? How could this actually make my life better? So I'm working with a group in Atlanta, Georgia. And I talked about, as I'm moving to the US, there's very different tax regulations, investing strategies. And I talked about how I actually really struggled to understand this. And then I just kind of threw it in ChatGPT and said, look, if I was retiring, had a pension, what would I do that I could retire in 10 years and, live in a certain way? So I actually asked that question because I don't really understand it and it's helping me. And it gave me a plan. So it was really interesting because in that room with those teachers, half of them were against it, half of them were for it. But as soon as it made sense to something that connected their life, they didn't listen to anything I said for the last 30 minutes. They just started making their financial plans on how they were going to retire. So all of a sudden, it wasn't just I'm using AI to cheat on essays. It's oh, this can actually help me navigate some things I might not know. I can ask it questions, kind of go back and forth. And so once you see that personal value to it, you're more likely to want to teach it to kids. And so then how does it actually, improve my, professional life? What are some things I could do? I know Jason, you're head of school. I don't know if you remember when you used to make schedules and we used to have those giant pieces of paper where we were doing this. I guarantee you AI is going to help you do that if it's not already. Figuring out all those things. And it's as opposed to you're sitting there for literally a week trying to figure out when someone's using the gym, right? And that kind of thing. And so that's going to save you time. And where do you use that time where it's kind of not the highest thinking strategy? And then we talk about with the students. The reason why is if I don't see it valuable to me, why would I ever teach it to kids? And I think just kind of going through that process of getting people to understand the value for their own learning. This is why, like I said, I don't talk about teaching. I talk about learning. If I get you to see value for it in your own learning, you're more likely to actually want to teach it to kids. And that's the best way you teach it is you actually have to go through the process yourself. So I think that's if you're trying to move people forward and you take AI out of there, in any term, it's the same process. What are some of the negatives? What are some of the positives? How does this help me personally? How can this help me professionally? Then talk about kids. And it's just kind of going through those things is really something I've been focused on, with communities that I work with.
For those listeners who know that I love Stoicism, George, I just want to pull out there are 4 virtues of Stoicism, and your answer has really brought out each of them. So the first one is temperance, acting with self-control and moderation. So balancing extremes. So when you say, what did you say? You said, make my mind adaptable, the Epictetus, for any circumstances. That includes your emotional adaptability, your adaptability with how you relate to other people. Another one is courage, the ability to face fear and adversity with strength, resilience, endurance, confidence, high-mindedness. Like you're asking the larger questions. You're not going in, and I love how you said that's the wrong question. How do we use AI with students? That's the wrong question. You've got to like start higher up, which
Mhm.
also lends itself to the third one, which is wisdom, the ability to understand what is good and evil and what is neither good nor evil, and that let that guide your
Mhm.
actions. And the last one is justice, treating others fairly and living in accordance with the law, including sharing, charity. And I think, George, when you say I don't talk about teaching, I talk about learning, like that is elevating the discussion. That is like you don't do education to students, right? You don't force them into this. Like they are
Mhm.
forced into it by the government, but when you talk about learning, that is something that includes this idea of like fairness and equality. Like we can learn together, especially when it comes to generative AI and arrival
Mhm.
technology. So I love that answer. I really appreciate how you tied that into Stoicism. Thank you, George. Thank you.
Well,
George,
the other thing too, Garth, and sorry, I'll just jump in here quick. One of the things that I know, I'm sure your audience is very familiar with schools, and you have professional learning days. We like use learning norms. We talk about that. It's like, I'm just not a fan. I just don't like using them, to be honest with you. But like, I remember a group actually saying you have to start with learning norms. I'm like, all right. So I'm like, hey, I'm not really a big fan of this. But here's the only learning norm we'll need for the day. Learn in a way that you expect from your students. That's it. And it all of a sudden it actually starts to get people asking, what do we expect from our students, right? And it's like, hey, when you're going on your phone, I don't really care. Are you learning? I have no issue with it. Are you going to get on a kid for doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, let's have that conversation. Let's actually have. It's not me saying if you use your phone, kids should be able to use their phone. It's like, how are we learning, right? Like even this last year, like I just turned 50, and I think when I was 49, I bought my daughter a piano, and I maybe took like 3 weeks of lessons as a kid. And I said, listen, I'm not buying her a piano so she can take lessons. I'm buying her a piano so she can take lessons and I can learn alongside of her. And so I'm actually learning alongside of her how to play piano. And one of the things is like, what really matters? Repetition. And it's like a lot of people talk about like the basics of that. Well, actually, repetition really matters. You can't get good at anything unless you do it over and over again.
Yeah.
And once it's interesting, it's kind of boring at the beginning, but when you see the achievement, it's really exciting. And it's like a good reminder to kind of go through the someone's learning. And we always talk about the innovation. And Jason, I don't know if you remember this. Years ago, they had a image from Alberta Education. It was really good, which was actually shocking. So they actually had literacy and they had the student in the middle and literacy and numeracy in the outside. But then they had all these like ethical citizens, right? Entrepreneurial spirit. And what I love, I share that image all over the place. And the reason why is like, hey, it's great that we talk about this aspirational stuff, but you do have to build a foundational. And I think it's a really good reminder for the groups is like, hey, there are some really foundational skills to get to the next phase. And I remember Yang Zhao saying one time when I was sitting listening to him, reading and writing should be the floor, not the ceiling. Right. And so it's like, hey, we have this minimum expectation, but it's that we're going above and beyond. So I apologize, Jason, for jumping in there.
no, that was so good. And that was part of a curriculum redesign project, that image. I remember it, and
Mm-hmm.
didn't make it all the way through, which is really unfortunate. It's changed about 6 times since you saw that.
Yep. Yep.
But so I've got a bunch of principals in my system. Okay. And I talk to
Yep.
principals across Alberta and Canada all the time. And the sentiment that I hear all the time is the world's changing too fast. We can't keep up. We need
Yep.
to slow this down. George, you're talking to me like I'm one of those principals. What are you saying to them?
Yep. Well, like the reality of it is something that is something that I talk about all the time is that we always complain the world is changing. Like, no, it's not actually that it's changing. It's how quickly the world has always changed. And I think that it is really imperative that wherever you are in the education system, you see yourself as a learner first and understanding you cannot learn everything, but really as a community, how much do you actually all learn together? And then what do you bring in these aspects? One of the things and this is going to date me a little bit. If you think about when Microsoft Word came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very simple software. So the reality of it is when you look at something like Microsoft Word, Google Docs, anything like that, right? Something that's like very basic, you know how to use it. So between myself, you, and Garth, we probably use it to a maximum of 10% of its capabilities, right? But if Garth uses a 10% that's different than my 10% and use it for a different 10%, then it's actually, now we're like learning from each other, right? But if we're just learning 10% and then teaching that 10%, then basically only, but it's actually, how do we actually share the 10% that we know, and then those percentages actually increase? And then what happens when we bring in more community too? And I think when I first started teaching, one of the things that was really interesting to me, I applied for a kindergarten position. And out of that interview, I got a high school technology position. And you might not remember this, Jason, but the reason I got a high school technology position was because I wanted to be on that student council at the University of Saskatchewan. And there was one position that was open, and it was to make the website.
No way.
And I actually made that. And I actually didn't even make the website. Somebody did it for me, and I sat and watched them. But I just wanted to be on that student council because I wanted to meet people. And I went to that kindergarten position, and they kept asking me about this website. And so I was like, why are they asking me this? And then they said, hey, you didn't get the job. We would like to offer you this high school technology job. Because making a website in 1999 is like, you're, one of the smartest. You're like Steve Jobs. You're like Steve Jobs all of a sudden, right? You're the smartest person there. So I actually walked into a classroom where I knew nothing. But there's like, basically I knew a little bit more than nothing. So I was like equipped to teach that. So I would walk into the class and say, hey, does anyone want to do this, to the students? And they're like, oh yeah. And they were like excited that someone would actually tap into them. And I was like, oh, this is like really interesting. And they never like, oh, you don't know anything. They would go out of their way to show me stuff, and we would talk, and then basically as a community. So that's always been that first experience going into a job where I didn't really understand the content, but actually leaning on the community of the classroom. That's always shaped how I taught everything after that fact, right? I only did that for 3 months, but it was like a really impactful experience to me, because I was like, listen, that you can know all, like, so much technology, but you'll never know all of it. But if you actually lean on other people, and I think that's why, a lot of my experience with technology has really helped me in leadership, because I understand the technology will change. Like Riverside pops up today, we could go on it tomorrow. It has a totally different interface, and you just got to press buttons and figure it out. That's how it is. Yep. So I think that's my experience, is like, hey, do you know what? On my keyboard, when I'm playing piano, guess how I learn songs? I start pressing buttons to figure it out. It's the same mentality. It's just a different technology. So I think that's where I'm trying to learn this, is that just really embrace being a learner and learning from other people in your community, no matter their role. And that includes from your student community as well.
Love it. I love it. And hopefully our listeners are picking up on your approach to life in general. So I'm going to move the conversation there. You've had quite a fitness journey. You mentioned already that we talked about you being a runner, and then now you're moving more towards to triathlon. So
don't put me on the spot, man.
I won't.
Yeah.
But you actually featured in Runner's World, and you provided a list of advice. And one in the article, it's talking about like one bad day does not have to lead to a second bad day. So I'm going to quote you back to you. You said, I would often spiral if I didn't make my goals in a day or a week, but now I have realized that I'm just trying to focus on being present and consistent each day. My mantra is one day at a time, repeated. So how does your fitness journey, your transformation, how does that influence, or what does that teach you about your own leadership and mindset, and maybe what can it teach other people?
Yeah, and Garth, you and I were talking about running, right? And so I don't know, like, this is something that happens to me every Sunday. I do a long run, right? And I have a goal of what I'm going to run out. And this is something I always say to my wife: keep your phone close, because I don't know what's going to happen, right? Something could happen, just whatever. And I'll like say, hey, like I cannot run anymore. Like, I'm just done. And I push myself to the limit. And that used to like sit with me for weeks, that I could not finish that run, that one run. But now I've kind of got to the mentality. She's like, are you upset? I'm like, no, obviously I'm pushing myself, to my limits. And that's kind of the goal, is to kind of keep pushing myself, and then I'll get there. And then, maybe next week I'll be able to achieve that. Now, like, I do call my wife way less now. Like, I'm getting better and better at it. Yeah. And sometimes it's like frustrating. Like, I'm like, oh, that was like a little bit too easy. Like, maybe I need to push myself a little bit harder, but I think it's just kind of looking at each day and just trying to make the best out of it, in that process. And, there's a little part of me that's, this is probably like one of the biggest, like I'm very focused on innovation and also routine. And I feel like when you think about routine, it almost people feel as opposites. But the analogy I use often is if you think of the best jazz musicians, and I'm not very familiar with jazz, but kind of seeing the movies and stuff like this, the ones that are considered the best, they just improvise. They just make music on the spot, and they're just so brilliant. But it's the reason why they can do that is because they know the basics inside out. That they can do that. They just start doing stuff, right? They actually know this too, and I think that's where the routine really comes in. That when you're so comfortable with stuff. So a lot of my work when I work with school districts, I have certain things I'm going to talk about that I know inside out, but I always say, listen, I want to listen to your superintendent. I want to listen to your head of school. And my job is to incorporate what they're talking about into my work. So there's actually a connection between the two. And they're like, well, how do you do that? I'm like, because I know my stuff so well that I can improvise on the spot.
Yeah.
And it's that routine there. And I don't want people thinking, well, you know what? Our head of school said this, and this guy from Canada said that. Who are they listening to? It's like, no, my job is to actually help bring your vision forward. As long as if you're saying things like that I don't agree with, obviously I'm not going to bring it up, but I'm trying to find those things and really kind of work on the spot. And I think that's where we really kind of develop that. And I think that having that routine allows us to really expand and grow and become better. So that's that kind of mantra that one day at a time repeated.
I love that. I love that, George, because I'm a baseball coach, I'm a basketball coach, and you cannot be creative on a court unless you know the basics,
Totally.
right? Like I totally see that analogy. I love it. Also, in your talk about, when you don't have to call your wife as much to pick her to pick you up. I also hear that there's a little bit of compassion that you have for yourself, like that you have grown away
Yeah.
from, geez, I didn't meet my goals to, hey, like today's a day and I'm just going to move on. And I think that's a really important piece going back to, how we approach learning, make my mind adaptable for any circumstances. It
Yeah.
requires you to have some compassion for yourself because as a learner, you will make mistakes, you will take steps back. So just really great stuff here, and I love that. I love that you push yourself to your limits all the time. You don't know what might happen, but you keep doing it.
Well, and that's, we were talking before, I'm learning the song Night Swimming, right?
Yeah,
And
on the piano.
on the piano. And it's tough for me. I don't want to say it's tough. I want to say it's tough for me because I'm learning this, and it's kind of interesting how I learn on YouTube and the songs I can learn that, probably why I dropped out of piano because I grew up with two older brothers listening to Depeche Mode and the Police. And then I'm playing, like Mary Had a Little Lamb, like this ain't cutting it for me. So whereas I teach my daughters like popular, I'm Just Ken, they love that music. And then they'll actually do the hard stuff to be able to play that stuff. They see the end point. And I think what's really important to me is that my own kids hear me playing that song and repeating it and failing and just going over and over again. And then they see the progression. And, and it's something I'm really passionate about is that they, like a lot of times in leadership, I think we talk about like, we need to take risks and we say that to our people, but they don't see us taking risks. They just hear us saying that. It's the easy thing for you. You're the boss, right? So like if you screw up, so for me, it's not about taking risks. It's about people seeing you take risks. They're the modeling of that risk taking. So I do that with my own kids. They see me trying stuff, failing, going again until I get it. And I think that's a really important thing, not only as a parent, but as, an educational leader.
Now, George, this podcast started about 2 years around the topic of Ted Lasso. I should have asked before we got on. Do you know who Ted Lasso is? Do you watch that show?
Of course
at
I
all?
do.
Okay,
Of course I do. Yeah.
Okay, so in your experience and in your mindset, that innovator mindset, we asked every one of our guests as we wrap up that episode, do you think Ted was a good leader, great leader? Was he a lousy leader? Like, how does he wash out in your point of view?
Well, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever thought that deeply about it. I think the one thing that always sticks out to me is from that show is when he references Walt Whitman and he says, "Be curious, not judgmental." That one really, really sticks out to me. And I've written about it before. And I think, especially in the time that we live in, when we think about be curious, not judgmental, a lot of times when we talk to people, we dismiss them. We dismiss them if we don't believe the same thing that we do. And I think that's, I think one of the things that's really progressed in my leadership, and I know I was at Rundle College years ago, and I could tell you I'm a very different speaker today than I was then. And I think I was pretty good then, I would say, but I think I've gotten better because I feel that the people that already would appreciate what I was saying, they just appreciate it more, but I might have pushed people away. And instead of like trying to convince people to just follow the things that I believe, it's like saying, you know what? Like, why do they believe what they do? And I think I'm way better at listening to people, understanding where they're at, and saying, like, hey, here's something I think, but also I totally get this. And then they see that connection. So when I think of the be curious, not judgmental, I think it more about how we are like that with other human beings than we are with content or with information. It is like, why does someone think that way? Why does someone so disagree with this, this viewpoint on education, this viewpoint on politics, things like that, and actually just asking questions to try to understand them. And so I think that, to me, that's one of the most powerful things I remember from that show. So if you took that in isolation, I'd say he's a great leader, because that's the best way to move people forward is not by telling them what to do, is by listening and understanding where they're at, right? And helping them move forward from where they're at today. And that really starts with listening, not trying to convince them of doing something that you believe they should be doing.
That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. I was kind of hoping you would reference his time in Amsterdam, where he thought he dropped acid and then came up with this new innovation in
Right.
in European football or soccer. And talk about his innovation.
I didn't know this was like a PG or R-rated podcast.
All good. Hey, listen,
well,
George, thank you.
It's interesting when you talk about innovation. The thing that people have always resonated with me specifically, I talk about it with how you get people to think and to do rather than the stuff. And I think that's why people connect with it, is because it's like, nobody's innovative if they don't feel you got their back. No one's innovative if you're trying to make them do things they hate. It's really about, how do you bring out the best in people? How do you actually recognize what their strengths in and are tapping it? And I don't know you, Garth, that well. I know Jason does this really well. I know he has a great community that he works with, and he's looking at what they're already good at and bringing that to life, as opposed to, saying, hey, we suck at this, right? Because like when you're, constantly telling people what they're bad at, they either get worse at it or they leave, right? And neither one's good, right? It's really, what are we good at already, and how do we bring that to life?
Hey, listen, George. First of all, quick fact check: Garth, over mushrooms, not acid. Just for
thank you.
Good.
And
Thank you.
And George, thanks for the kind words. That was really, really appreciated.
Yeah,
I have to say that when you were at Rundle College, it was transformative at that time, and I can't imagine it being better. But I do believe you that you've learned about curiosity and leaning in. And so, for our listeners, we got a leadership challenge every week in here. So we want you to reflect on how you're creating a culture of innovation in your schools and organizations, and how you're not being judgmental, but instead being a little bit curious. Are you encouraging curiosity throughout? Are you modeling growth, as George has so perfectly articulated? And we want you to share your reflections and maybe even tag us online. And we'd love hearing from you all along the way.
Yeah, that's great. And George, we end the show the same way all the time, and we ask our guests to do that. So do you mind closing off the show with the tagline?
What is the tagline? I don't know the tag. What's the tagline?
The tagline is, until next time, keep leading the lasso way.
Why? What? That has nothing to do with Stoicism. I thought this is a new season. You're always doing the lasso stuff?
Yeah.
Is that what's going on?
We close up with the lasso.
Yeah.
Yeah, what Garth said. Can I just do that? What Garth said.
See, so George, like what you mentioned earlier, no one is innovative if they don't feel supported. No one is innovative, right? Unless they feel like they have a sense of belonging. Ted Lasso is a kinder and more compassionate way to lead, which we feel is the cornerstone of innovation, as I think you do as well.
Yeah, well, and, as I'm thinking about that question more and more, he's a very people-centric leader, right? And I think that's how you bring out the best people, right? Whether you're playing soccer, you're playing, you're leading a school, whatever you're doing, you're with your family, whatever you do, right? That's how you bring out the best in who you serve. So keep I don't know, keep leading the lasso way. Is that what?
George,
Yeah,
you are the best. You
say
get
it
it?
again.
George, you got it.
Say it again with conviction, George. Come on.
Keep leading the lasso way.
You're the man.
I
Thanks a lot,
love it.
George. Appreciate having
There you
you
go.
here.
My
It's
pleasure.
been a pleasure.
Good to see you.
Thanks.